Monica says, "You admit at the moment you find life pleasant, that it really does seem quiet here and restful. Even the matron, though she looks rather dominating, has left us alone." Lord Claverton says, "Yes, but remember what she said. She said, 'I'm going to leave you alone. You want perfect peace. That's what Badgley Court is for.' I thought that very ominous when people talk like that. It indicates a latent desire to interfere with the privacy of others, which is certain to explode." Yeah, sometimes people put on a facade in order to have the presence that they weren't going to admit that they wanted. Monica says, "Hush, Father. I see you're coming from the house. Take your newspaper and start reading to me." Miss Pickett enters and says, "Good morning, Lord Claverton. Good morning, Miss Claverton. Isn't this a glorious morning? I'm afraid you'll think I've been neglecting you, so I've come to apologize and explain. I've been in such a rush these last few days, and I thought Lord Claverton will understand my not coming in directly after breakfast. He's led a busy life too, but I hope you're happy. Is there anything you need that hasn't been provided? All you have to do is make your wants known. Just ring through to my office. If I'm not there, my secretary will be, Miss Timmins. She'll be overjoyed to have the privilege of helping you." Monica says, "You're very kind. Oh, I'm sorry. We don't know how we ought to address you. Do we call you matron?" Miss Pickett says, "Oh no, not matron. Of course, I'm a matron in a sense. No, I don't simply mean that I'm a married woman, a widow in fact, but I was a trained nurse, and of course, I've always lived in what you might call a medical milieu. My father was a specialist in pharmacology, and my husband was a distinguished surgeon. Do you know, I fell in love with him during an appendicitis operation. I was a theater nurse, but you mustn't call me matron. At Badgley Court, you see, we've studied to avoid anything like a nursing home atmosphere. We don't want our guests to think of themselves as ill, though we never have guests who are perfectly well, except when they come, like you, Miss Claverton." Monica says, "Claverton Ferry. Or Ferry, it's shorter." Miss Pickett says, "I'm sorry, Miss Claverton Ferry. I'm Miss Pickett. Just call me Miss Pickett. It's a short and simple name, and easy to remember. But as I was saying, guests in perfect health are exceptional, though we never accept any guest who's incurable. You know, we've been deluged with applications from people who want to come here to die. We never accept them, nor do we accept any guest who looks incurable. We make that stipulation to all the doctors who send people here. When you go into lunch, just take a glance around the dining room. Nobody looks ill. They're all convalescents, are resting like you. So you remember, always call me Miss Pickett, won't you?" Monica says, "Yes, Miss Pickett. But please tell me one thing. We haven't seen her yet, but the chambermaid referred to a nurse when we see her. Do we address her as nurse?" Miss Pickett says, "Oh yes, that's different. She's a real nurse, you know, fully qualified. Our system is very likely delicately balanced. For me to be simply Miss Pickett reassures the guest in one respect, and calling our nurses nurse reassures them in another respect." Lord Claverton says, "I follow you perfectly." Miss Pickett says, "And now I must fly. I've so much on my hands, but before I go, just let me tuck you up. You must be very careful at this time of year. This early warm weather can be very treacherous. There now, you look more comfy. Don't let him stay out late in the afternoon, Miss Claverton Ferry. And remember, when you want to be very quiet, there's the silence room with a television set. It's popular in the evenings, but not too crowded." And exits. And it's important, whether it's a physical ailment or psychological or some sort of moral issue, it's better to identify with the good side. In the case of the latter ones, the true side. Certainly work on the other sides. You don't have to deny it. Of course, you don't have to shout it off to everybody. Lord Claverton says, Much as I had feared, but I'm not going to say nothing could be worse. Where there's a Miss Piggott, there may be among the guests something worse than Miss Piggott. Monica says, let's hope this was merely the concoction which she decants for every newcomer. Perhaps, after what she considers proper courtesies, she will leave us alone. Miss Piggott re-enters and says, I really am neglectful, Miss Cleverton Fairy. I ought to tell you more about the amenities which Bagley Court can offer to guests of the younger generation. When there are enough young people among us, we dance in the evening. At the moment, there's no dancing, and it's still too early for the bathing pool. But several of our guests are keen on tennis, and of course there's always croquet. But I don't advise croquet until you know enough about the other guests to know whom not to play with. I'll mention no names, but there are one or two who don't like being beaten, and that spoils any sport, in my opinion. Monica says, thank you, Miss Piggott, but I'm very fond of walking, and I'm told there are very good walks in this neighborhood. Miss Piggott says, there are indeed. I can lend you a map. There are lovely walks on the shore or in the hills, quite away from the motor roads. You must learn the best walks. I won't apologize for the lack of excitement. After all, peace and quiet is our raison d'etre. Now I'll leave you to enjoy it, and exits. Monica says, I hope she won't remember anything else. Lord Claverton says, she'll come back to tell us more about the peace and quiet. Monica says, I don't believe she'll be bothering us again. I could see from her expression when she left that she thought she'd done her duty by us for today. I'm going to prowl about the grounds. Don't look so alarmed. If you spy any guests who seem to be stalking you, put your newspaper over your face and pretend you're pretending to be asleep. And if they think you're asleep, they'll do something to wake you. But if they see you're shaming, then they'll have to take the hint. And exits. A moment later, Lord Claverton spreads his newspaper over his face, and Miss Cargill enters. She sits in a deck chair nearby, composes herself, and takes out her knitting. After a pause, Miss Cargill says, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I always sit here. It's the sunniest and most sheltered corner, and none of the other guests have discovered it. It was clever of you to find it so quickly. What made you choose it? Lord Claverton says, throwing down the newspaper. My daughter chose it. She noticed that it seemed to offer the advantages which you have just mentioned. I'm glad you can confirm them. Miss Cargill says, oh, that is your daughter. That very charming girl, and obviously devoted to her father. I was watching you both in the dining room last night. You are the great Lord Claverton, aren't you? Somebody said you were coming here. It's been the topic of conversation, but I couldn't believe that it would really happen. And now I'm sitting here talking to you. Dear me, it's astonishing after all these years, and you don't even recognize me. I'd know you anywhere. But then, we've all seen your portrait in the papers. So often. And everybody knows you, but still, I wish you could have paid me that compliment, Richard. Lord Claverton says, what? Miss Cargill says, don't you know me yet? Lord Claverton says, I'm afraid not. Miss Cargill says, there were the three of us, Effie, Maud, and me, that day we spent on the river. I've never forgotten it. The turning point of all my life. Now, whatever were the names of those friends of yours, and which one was it invited us to lunch? I declare I've utterly forgotten their names. And you gave us lunch. I've forgotten what hotel, but such a good lunch. And we all went in a punt on the river. And we had a tea basket with some lovely little cakes. I've forgotten what you called them. And you made me try to punt, and I got soaking wet, and nearly dropped the punt pole, and you all laughed at me. Don't you remember? Lord Claverton says, pray continue. The more you remind me of, the better I'll remember. Miss Cargill says, and the three of us talked you over afterwards, Effie and Maud and I. What a time ago it seems. It's surprising I remember it all so clearly. You attracted me, you know, at the very first meeting. I can't think why, but it's the way things happen. I said, there's a man I could follow round the world, but Effie it was, you know. Effie was very shrewd. Effie, it was said, you'd be throwing yourself away. Mark my words, Effie said. If you choose to follow that man, he'd give you the slip, and he's not to be trusted. That man is hollow. That's what she said. Or did she say yellow? I'm not quite sure. Do you remember now? Don't you, Richard? Lord Cliven says. Not the conversation that you just repeated. That is new to me. But I do remember you. Miss Cargill says, time has wrought sad changes in me, Richard. I was a very lovely once. So you thought, and others thought so too. But as you remember, please, Richard, just repeat my name, just once. The time by which you knew me, it would give me such a thrill to hear you speak my name once more. Lord Cliven says, your name was Macy Batterson. Now, hopefully, when the looks and the other physical abilities, what those physical abilities give you access to, the wealth and the status, once that is gone, hopefully there's something better, or even if it's the same. And as long as you're alive, you really haven't thrown yourself away. I mean, you can throw away opportunity, but... Daisy Batterson. Miss Cargill says, oh, Richard, you're only saying that to tease me. You know I meant my stage name, the name by which you knew me. Lord Cliven says, well then, Miss Maisie Montjoy. Miss Cargill says, yes, Maisie Montjoy. I was Maisie Montjoy once, and you didn't recognize me. Lord Clapperton says, you've changed your name, no doubt, and I've changed mine, your name now and here. Miss Cargill says, is Miss John Cargill? Lord Clapperton says, you're married, I suppose, many years ago? Miss Cargill says, many years ago, the first time. That didn't last long. People sometimes say, make one mistake in love, you're more likely to make another. How true that is. Algy was a weakling, but simply he was, not sly and slippery. Then I married Mr. Cargill, 20 years older than me. He was just what I needed. Lord Cliven says, is he still living? Miss Cargill says, he had a weak heart, and he worked too hard. Have you never heard of Cargill Equipments? They make office furniture. Lord Cliven says, but I've never had to deal with the question of equipment. I trust that the business was very successful. I mean that he left you comfortably provided for. Miss Cargill says, well, Richard, my doctor could hardly have sent me here if I wasn't well off. Yes, I'm provided for, but isn't it strange that you and I should meet here at last? Here of all places, Lord Clapperton says. Why not of all places? What I don't understand is why you should take the first opportunity finding me here to revive old memories, which I should have thought we both preferred to leave buried. Miss Cargill says, there you're wrong, Richard. Effie always said what a clever girl she was. He doesn't understand women. Any woman who trusted him would soon find that out. A man may prefer to forget all the women he has loved, but a woman doesn't want to forget a single one of her admirers. Why, even a faithless lover is still in her memory, a kind of testimonial. Men live by forgetting. Women live on memories. Besides, a woman has nothing to be ashamed of. A man is always trying to forget his own shabby behavior. Lord Cliverton says, but we settled our account. What harm was done? I learned my lesson and you learned yours. If you needed the lesson,